thank you, all three of you, for your wonderful presentation and quick, succinct. We have the information now. In terms of looking at maintenance backlog and the solution, one thing you want to look at is sort of more of a life cycle cost of approaching a strategy. So can you give your thoughts on what kind of life cycle strategies would be the most cost effective, and how would we assure that the work is actually being done by monitoring and controlling the outcomes of our investments that we make in funding road maintenance backlog? So I think a lot of the public wants to know how we can guarantee if we invest in these problems, they're actually going to be invested in a wise manner. So can we talk about life cycle investments and outcomes?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just make a comment and then I defer to my colleagues here to add whatever they want. Two comments, I guess. The first is life cycle cost analysis would benefit us all, including the consumers or the people of California, in terms of what new capital projects really cost. As has been mentioned, we fund transportation in California with three main sources: local, state, and federal transportation funds. And we program those dollars at the state level through the State Transportation Improvement Program, which is a program of providing dollars for capital projects throughout the state. However, when we do that, we talk about the capital cost of the project, but we don't talk about what the long-time maintenance and operating, maintenance and rehabilitation requirements will be from that capital investment. So the other place we see this is with the emergence of local sales tax measures as a force for funding transportation in California. Often those are used to fund expanded capacity on the state highway system, which on the one hand is a positive thing because it may help the operations of the system and provide greater capacity for the system. But again, when those dollars are funded, usually it does not include a look at what the long-term operating preservation and maintenance costs will be for those new lanes. One of the ways that we want to address it is we've talked about streamlining the approval and expanding the use of pricing or tolling on the state highway system. One of the reasons we think that's a useful thing is because usually when you're talking about a tolled project, the toll revenues are not just dedicated to building the capital infrastructure, but they're also used to operate and maintain whatever you built for the life of the project. And so we think that kind of analysis is a useful analysis, and we think it should be expanded to other areas. But one concrete place that we're suggesting more of that is by using pricing to give folks a clear view of what revenue could be generated, and that it would not just be used for the capital improvement, but also the lifetime operation and maintenance and preservation of the facility.
Like if you looked at 10, 20 years of funding, would it be cheaper to do a bond or do a one-time large amount of money up front to just focus on that maintenance backlog and then have a lower ongoing maintenance cost? Or would it be cheaper to build yourself a phase-in of funding to finally achieve a certain level of funding to do the maintenance? Which would be the more effective, cost-effective way of solving this problem?
I think you'd have to do an assessment of what are the immediate needs that you're trying to address that you would be bonding for. And can those get done in a short period of time? And would the debt service that you're going to pay to bond on those, would that outpace the cost of waiting to do the project later? So I think you have to make that kind of a financial analysis based on specifics. I would just say also that when you talk about bonding, I think one of the things that's really important for transportation finance is that we don't simply rely on a GO bond to do it. I think you still want to have a revenue source that is a user-based transportation revenue source that's funding bonding activity. But I think there's an analysis that needs to be done based on what it is you're trying to achieve and whether those out-year costs would exceed or come in under the debt service.
Yeah, I think we need to do some kind of analysis of that. I know that interest rates are pretty low right now, correct? On
Yeah, historically they are fairly low.
revenue-backed government California bonds.
That's correct. But if I can add on to Secretary Kelly's comments, one of the things we need to be mindful of is that the kind of rehabilitation projects we're talking about require a significant amount of time to design before we can go out and bid these projects and reconstruct our roadways. So I definitely take that into account when I'm trying to think of some sort of funding plan. Okay. The department needs time to prepare these projects to get out to utilize any funding that we would come up with. So that's something to keep in mind.
Senator Wachowski and other senators have questions as well.
Help me out with the factors. If we are at historic rates for low interest rates, what analysis would you be doing from a financial package? I mean, I can get the idea, the GO and the revenue proportions, but we are at all-time world low rates. Everybody's borrowing money except for the state of California. What other factors would you look in the analysis if you know you're at least at 59 billion short on maintenance? Forget about the new stuff that you want to build. What would it be?
Well, if I can address that just quickly, we're not prepared to deliver $59 billion worth of projects at the drop of a hat. Understood. If the funding was available. We need time to prepare for that. And a typical project can take 4 to 5 years to design. I mean,
I don't believe that that's true, because I sat on the Alameda County Transportation Commission. They're one of the 20 self-help counties. There are plenty of, we fund all these transportation commissions. We know the projects that are there. I dare say that we can get a list of all 400 cities that know what roads that they're, when TARPA came in, they were ready to go. They said the money's here for a year. You either fund your city, local roads, or the money's gone. So I don't think that we need 4 or 5 years.
Senator, I think what I was trying to articulate is that it really depends on the type of project you're trying to achieve. If it's a maintenance project, we don't allow GO bond money for maintenance and transportation today. So
right, well, that's a good thing to ask.
It's generally a simpler project that needs less design time and can be delivered more quickly. In fact, when the ARRA monies were made available, we sought out just those kind of projects to dedicate the revenue to because they were simple, could use money quickly, did not need to be bonded for. When you're doing more complex transportation projects that are going to take some time and you want to front load those projects, bonding might make sense. All I was suggesting is I think there's an analysis that you have to undertake between what your debt costs would be, how quickly you're going to get the project done, and the outstanding costs of waiting if it's a major rehabilitation project, and that cost will grow over time. So I think there's a series of analysis that needs to be done. I just clarify one other thing too. We are bonding transportation dollars in California like most states are not. Virtually all of the local sales tax measures that are approved in the 20 urban counties throughout the state of California are actively using revenue bonds to deliver projects. And even the state of California, we are now spending about 15% of our state revenues on debt service. So I'm cautious on new bonding.
So I guess my frustration, to follow up with the chair, is that we're $6 billion short. The title of this hearing is funding the transportation maintenance backlog. I heard about prioritizing. I heard about the difficulty. I heard about the roads getting down. How do I get to 6? If I'm $6 billion short, is it a VLF? Is it a registration fee? Is it the excise tax? How do we clobber together 6? Because 6 is 0. 6 is the new 0. If we get $6 billion, we're at 0, folks. We're not building anything new. So that's my frustration is help me help the CTA and help the Caltrans and help the cities in saying, you know, the governor's message is disappointing. Here's the problem, but I don't want to ask for bonds. I don't want to increase the car tax because Arnold made that a celebrity, you know, statement. I need you folks who are in the trenches to tell me what am I pressuring the rest of my colleagues on to get to 6?
All right.
Well, I got two responses. One, you're going to hear more about various options that are under consideration in the next panel. Secondly, I just say that the governor has laid out the problem in his State of the State with the deferred maintenance number, what it is. I don't think it's going to take one magic bullet source of revenue. It's probably going to take a little bit of several things. Whatever you do is probably going to require a 2/3 vote of the legislature, is my guess. So we have to work through these issues and these problems. We've laid out a couple of ideas. One of them is expanded and streamlining tolling facilities to cover maintenance and other things as you go forward. And we will work through, we are engaging in this process, and we are engaging with the stakeholders through a CTIP process to try to build a coalition of support around these options. Virtually everything is on the table that is in the background document here at the committee. It's the same set of things that virtually everybody's talking about. We see the speakers come forward with something, and we will engage and move forward in this process collectively and try to see if we can get a good solution on a pay-as-you-go funding source.
Senator Canella and Senator Roth.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presentations. Clearly, we have a problem. I think every interest group has articulated what the problem is and what potential solutions are, and I'm certainly open to a discussion on additional revenue. I think at some point we need to talk about that, but I think we need to do certain things in the state of California if we're going to invest in infrastructure. For example, we've got to get the money we collect in weight fees and put that back towards transportation projects. I mean, we shouldn't be raising more money when we've got $1 billion a year approximately that we could put back into transportation projects. But also I'm interested, as part of the preparation for this hearing, I pulled up a document that was prepared by ACEC in 2014, and it was basically parodying exactly what all of you were saying, that we need to, they certainly want to invest in new infrastructure, they're engineers. But there was one graph that showed combined local, state, and federal gasoline taxes, and it showed that the U.S. average is about 49 cents per gallon when you look at local, state, and federal gasoline taxes. In California, we come in at 68.5 cents. And in fact, we're the second highest in the nation, just behind New York, which is 68.9 cents per gallon. So why do we have this discrepancy between projects that need to be funded, maintained, and the revenue when we charge, a lot higher than the national average? So what's going on?
I'm probably going to give you an answer that won't entirely satisfy you, but one thing that's a little bit misleading on that, or at least is important to understand about the history of the excise tax, is that if you asked that same question or pulled that same chart out just a few years ago, the excise tax number would have been 18 cents lower. And that's because we did a swap in California where we took what was the sales tax and we turned it in the excise tax. So now our excise tax rate is, as you said, 68.5 cents. I think that chart also includes, there are local sales tax measures that apply to all goods, including gasoline, which I think makes up some of that 68.5 cents. But I just say that historically, again, it's a little bit different or new because from a national perspective, you would say, gee, California's excise tax jumped 18 cents. But it was only because we backed out the sales tax for an equivalent amount. It was a revenue neutral act. And so that's part of it. We also have the largest and the most complex transportation system in the country. And the needs are mammoth, and we are trying to solve a lot of things.
I understand that, but we also have a very large population, and we buy a lot of gasoline, so we're certainly paying a lot of taxes. So at some point, maybe additional revenue is part of the solution, but we also have to look at the way we're doing business to see, are we using our money in the best way possible? Because we do collect a lot of money at some point, and then there's argument that electric cars don't pay their share. Well, that's such a small number. I think that they should pay their share, for the record, but it really doesn't impact as far as overall dollars. So I also, as Senator Wieckowski, I was frustrated with the governors. You laid out the problem, I thought, quite well. But at some point, we do need some leadership from the governor's office to say what he wants to see, because you know, I don't want to have all of us kind of fighting in the trenches and then we produce something and the governor ultimately isn't satisfied for that. So I think it's going to take an approach with the governors, the administration, and the legislative body to come together with a solution. And I would like not to just take little bites. If we're going to deal with it, let's deal with it in its totality. Let's try to solve the problem moving forward so we're not in the same boat 2 or 3 years in the future.
Okay, Senator Roth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, what is the plan for the late fees?
Well, subject to legislation that was passed in 2011 on a bipartisan basis, the late fees in California were transferred to fund the debt service on transportation-related bonds. That was an act that was taken because collectively there was a decision to address our fiscal condition in the state of California. The late fees, as I said, are a user-based form of financing transportation, and their use of debt service is limited only to those transportation projects that are funded with bond debt. At this time, if we simply transferred the late fees away from debt service and to transportation with no backfill, we would blow $1 billion plus hole in the general fund. So I think that it's a careful conversation. If the late fee transfer is going to be part of this, I think it's important that we consider the impact on the general fund and what to do about that.
Thank you. Now for the league. Has the league taken a position on the various options for increasing transportation funding? In other words, do you have a preference or preferences that you'd like to talk to us about?
We adopted a very broad policy for additional investment. We did that.
Sounds like what we do here.
We did that to remain very nimble in the negotiations, to be honest. There are a lot of options on the table. I think there are we definitely have preferences. I know that we had a conversation about bonds. I know we would prefer a pay-as-you-go over a bond, because a bond tends to be one-time money, and then once it runs out, the Prop 1B bond, cities and counties use their money, I think, faster than any other pot of money in Prop 1B. We were ready to go, and we used the money, and then it ran out, and we haven't, while there's still some bonds available, we don't have access necessarily to those bond funds. They're for other pots of money. So that we shy a little bit away from a bond because there's long-term cost and it's one-time funding, and we really need to look at a stable, ongoing source of funds. That's really our policy. That's what we're looking for.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
10 minutes. I leave. Okay, Senator Leyva.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for all of your information. I find it all very helpful. I have a simple question. If we were to magically be able to find the $59 billion, how many jobs would that create?
Oh, that's a good
I
one.
need a calculator, but I would tell you that there is an index that the Federal Highway Administration generally uses that says for every $1 billion invested in transportation infrastructure, you create between 15 and 18,000 jobs.
Direct jobs.
Yeah, good jobs.
I think it's more than direct, but jobs.
And so that's over 1 million, and those, we would consider those to be job years.
Yeah.
Depending on how long the project is. So
Okay.
it wouldn't be 1 million jobs all at once, but over time.
Very good. Thank you very much.
All right, Senator Bates.
Okay. I'll be back in a little bit.
I was a little concerned with the presentation regarding Project Ready, and having served on OCTA, and I see our former director out there, we were always admonished regarding the ability to spend money that we had if we didn't have projects ready. So looking at the timeline, if we were to magically come up with the money, how long does it take us to have a prioritization of the projects that are really, most necessary in terms of maintenance? Is it going to be bridges? Is it the pavement on the freeways? Do you actually have some sort of maintenance schedule, and you're looking at currently projects that you need to start thinking about or get on the design board in the event we come up with the revenues?
Is that more of a Caltrans question or a local question?
Whoever's got a...
So from From the state side, of course, we have identified project areas that we need to invest in as part of the $59 billion backlog. What we are not funded to do, though, is to create a large shelf of projects waiting for funding. We're not funded to do that. So the way that Caltrans is staffed is to provide projects for the amount of funding that we have. And over the last few years with ARA and the tremendous amount of savings we've had, we've sort of picked the low-hanging fruit. We've been able to deliver those easy-to-do projects and use that funding. So we would need time to gear back up again to utilize funding, and we do know the areas that we need to focus on. And we have what we would call ideas, project initiation type of documents where we would say these are the projects we need to design, but the design is not complete.